This is Dr. Mike, and today we are starting chapter 4 of our lecture on ethics. I just want to review for a moment what we talked about in the last chapter on relativism and how important that is to understanding or gaining a worldwide ethical position. It's very difficult because each culture will have their own ethics and their own cultures and things that will in many ways hinder because we always think that our ways are the best. And so it's a little bit of a continuation today in chapter 4 about those kind of ideas. But how do we arrive at a world understanding of what ethics involved? Today, in chapter 4, we're going to talk about egoism, altruism, and the social contract. And these have some very interesting ramifications for our day. There's some very interesting examples that go along with that. When we think about egoism, we realize that's the view that people act in their own self-interest, regardless of whether it's moral or not. I think that is a truism that we gain from looking at human nature. People will do what's best for them, regardless of their moral position. It's amazing. You see that a lot of times in leaders who fall into sexual problems with an affair with someone. Many times it's a pastor, and the pastor would have very strong ethical positions, and yet they will do whatever feels good, whatever they want to do, and they will usually mess their lives up doing that. On the other hand, ethical egoism is the view that people should always act in their own self-interest as it's morally right to do so, which says basically what you do is what you need to do because it's right for you and for not everyone else. There's been a major shift in our world in the last probably 20 years toward that. Everyone, if it feels good, do it. That's the point you hear quite often. Or I have to do what's right for me. It has nothing to do with anybody else. There are no universal morals. Every person has their own decision to make, way to go, way to walk. And so you do what feels good. And so, there's an old song from the 80s, I guess, called I Did It My Way. That's exactly an ethical reflection of what we see going on in the world. The opposite of that would be someone who gives of themselves, above and beyond. It's not about being self-centered at all, but it's about working for others. Mother Teresa would have been a prime example of that. Mother Teresa spent most of her life working in leper hospitals in India. If you know anything about leprosy, you know that you can only be around it like 6 weeks or so without contracting it yourself. And so it is important that you have to come out, go back in. I had a friend who was a missionary to leper colonies in Korea and in Hawaii. And we actually have 2 leper colonies in the United States, one in Louisiana, one in Hawaii. And he would go into Korea and he would take things like Bible on cassette and things that they could use. He could only stay 6 weeks. And then when he came out, he'd leave behind cassettes for them to listen to and literally ministered that way for years and years because of the contagious aspects of it. But they gave of themselves. President Jimmy Carter, who left office fairly young man, he wasn't very old. He's had a long post-presidential history, and he's now in his 90s, of course. And but even in his 90s, he was working on houses for Habitat for Humanity, who builds houses for people that were in need, they needed a place to live. That would be an example of altruism, that you're doing for others. There's a lot of criticism of altruism, which includes the argument that it's impractical, it's unrealistic to expect people to consistently act selflessly, and the idea that their altruism is attributed to motive of self-interest. That maybe people have ulterior motives, that it's impossible for someone to do things simply for the reason that they love to help other people. Well, I think that might be an extreme. I think there are people that are very much into things other than themselves. An extreme person into himself would be what we call a narcissist, that everything's always about them. You can usually spot one of them very easily. Within 5 minutes of a conversation, they will be talking about me all the time. I had a guy recently in a meeting that he was the guest, and he said, I always love talking about me. And we could laugh that off as a joke, were it not for the fact that he was just that. He was purely selfish. An egoist, and ego is a Freudian word that means self. An egoist is someone who is all about themselves. They do things for purely selfish motives. They do things to get ahead and will walk over other people. You've seen those people in places where you work and maybe where you go to church or wherever you do other things, that they are purely in it for what they can get out of it. And so as we look at those two things, we think about, the ideas that we have when we talk about living together as people. We have all kinds of people in this world. We have egoists, we have altruists, we have people that are somewhere in between that are neither. So they're all over that spectrum, but that's a part of the social contract that we live under in this world that we're in. That we come to terms with people as they are, and then we deal with that. We don't try to make them something that they are not. I had an old African American pastor friend years ago who used to say, when you try to be what you ain't, you mess up what you is. And while the language may not be appropriate, the point is well taken, that people are who they are, and that they will, if they try to be something else, it messes that up. But reciprocal altruism is important because it suggests that people can act in their own self-interest by helping others. They may get benefits in return, they may not. There are a lot of people that do things that never seem to get anything back for it. So it's very important in that sense. So when we talk about morality, we talk about the sources of morality, and we kind of dispute where they came from, where your morals come from. We can talk about the church. We can talk about your grandfather, your grandmother, your dad, your mom, whoever it is. We kind of argue, well, they come from this, they come from that. But these moral values are whether they're based on objective facts or just subjective preferences. But we may not come to an agreement on that. But reasons to be moral can include a belief in objective moral facts, a recognition of the social benefits of moral behavior, or a desire to live up to certain moral standards or ideas. Now, think about both of those things. First of all, a recognition of the social benefits. If you're not going to be a moral person, you can become a pariah and an outcast. That's exactly what's happened to Vladimir Putin in Russia with his attack and absolute destruction of Ukraine and the stealing of their children and carrying them back to Russia to be indoctrinated and become Russians. He's done everything that he can to show that he doesn't have any moral absolutes, that that his morals are based upon preferences. This is what he wants to do. And so as a result of that, he has become pariah in the world communities. Papers have been issued for his arrest for war crimes, which he may never live to have those sorted out. But at any rate, he is on that list. It's almost like being impeached as a president. Once you're impeached, whether you're found guilty or not, you're still, that tag goes with you the longest day you live. So Bill Clinton it's always mentioned that he was impeached, or Donald Trump's going to always mention he was impeached twice, and in both cases, it was enough. The label on them was enough to follow them the rest of their life. They didn't have to be proven guilty to succumb to that. So basically, we are moral because those are the bases that we live within our community as a person that can hold their head up. Just think about the person that maybe commits sexual crimes and gets labeled a sexual predator and has to have their name put on the registry of sexual offenders. They will never live a normal life. Some communities will run them out. They will always be looked at. They can't be around children. They can't do this. They can't do that. It very limits their cultural benefits. And so we try to be moral, sometimes if for no other reason, so that we can function in the community without being an outcast. The other thing is that sometimes we want to live up to certain moral standards or ideas. Maybe you're a member of a church, maybe you're a Shriner, maybe you're any other club, They have certain moral standards that they live up to. So you strive to do that. It makes you a better person. I think I mentioned to you that Thomas Jefferson said that the major purpose of having religion was to cause people to be moral. That was a big deal in the early days of the country because they believed that only that kind of person could maintain and hold on to and hold up to the ideals of democracy and the republic. Your book will talk to you about what's called the prisoner's dilemma. It's a game theory that illustrates the tension between individual self-interest and mutual cooperation. It relates to the discussion of egoism and social contract by highlighting the potential benefits of cooperation and the cost of individualistic behavior. Years ago, there were men in Africa that were trapping monkeys. And so what they would do, they would take a gourd, they would drill the hole, and it would be a pretty small hole, just enough for the monkey to get his hand inside. And they would put candy in the gourd. And once the monkey put its hand in the gourd and grabbed the candy, it could not get its fist back out through the hole. So in order to escape, it would have to turn loose the candy. But they were counting on the fact that the monkey was so greedy that he would be captured rather than give himself, give the candy up. And that's kind of what this prisoner's dilemma is about. It's either be caught, in your greed. Some people are so greedy that they keep thinking that they'll never be held accountable. They'll never be brought to account for the things that they've done. And human greed will cause people to do things that unimaginable. On another front, think about Hitler and the killing of 6 million Jews in concentration camps. I've spent a great deal of my life studying Nazism and concentration camps. The most horrific things imaginable were done to humans. Man's inhumanity to man is unbelievable. And yet people that are in dictatorships that want to rule the world, they will do the most horrible things possible to hold on to power. The greed of power will cause them to do that. That is the worst form of egoism maybe on the planet, that it's about you being in control to the point that you refuse to give up or to change your ways. And then on the other front, altruists are those that are always about helping other people. That can be good, it can be bad. As I said, some people are altruistic to get a good name. I think one of my best examples from my years of study as a pastor would have been Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. His name, by the way, Iscariot is a village. It was actually Judas of the village of Cariot. That's what Iscariot means. The people there were known because they were the only purebred Jews in the bunch. The others had intermarried with peoples around them. Real Jews looked down their nose at them. They were second rate. But the people from Cariot had this stinking pride about them that we're the only real Jews. And Judas, being the egotist that he was, no doubt joined the disciples of Jesus thinking, hey, this guy's going to build a kingdom, and me being the only Jew in the bunch, I can get somewhere. He became the treasurer of the 12 disciples. The Bible says he got frustrated with Jesus and his teachings about dying and being killed, and this is not what Judas signed up for. And so he started pilfering money out of the bag, the disciples' money, and purchased some land of his own. He's going to start his own kingdom. The point I'm trying to make is that on the night of the crucifixion, the Passover, Judas gets up and goes out to sell Jesus out to the priest. But the disciples look at each other and say, wonder where he's going. He must be going to go give money to the poor. That's what he's always concerned about, was the poor. But the Bible gives us some commentary on that when Jesus washed this woman washed his feet with this very expensive ointment once. And Judas said, why was this waste made? And the commentary, the John, the writer, says, and Judas said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he kept the bag and he was pilfering what was put therein. So people do altruistic things for very different reasons sometimes. Maybe not for the good that comes from it, but for their own pat on the back. I've met people like that a lot in the ministry. They want to be stroked. They want to be patted on the back. And so that's a different kind of altruism. Very few people will give just to be giving to get for the good that's done. Lots of people give millions of dollars to schools, for instance, to build buildings and all those things. They like to get their name on the building. You'll see that lots of times that happens. So egotism relates to the social contract by highlighting the potential benefits of cooperation against the cost of individualistic behavior. Egotism is also connected to the laissez-faire form of capitalism and economics that you find so much of in this country. The idea that individuals are free to pursue their own self-interest in the marketplace, and this will lead to greater economic prosperity for everybody. However, critics will argue that the unchecked egotism can lead to inequity, exploitation, social instability. You and I are living through that currently. In the last administration, 2 events happened that speak to this very idea, and that is the deregulation of the railroad industry, where they did not have to check their tracks and their cars for safety issues. 3 or 4 weeks ago, a train derailed in Ohio and spilled an environmentally damaging chemical into the air, into the water, and it will be years of ecological cleanup just because the deregulation stopped that. If that testing had been done and checking, this would not have happened. This past week, we've had now 12 banks that have failed because during the last administration, they removed the deregulation of the banks from oversight. So people that were supposed to be looking over these things and detecting them weren't there. They were removed. So you see in capitalism, the idea is it's unchecked free reign, which one party of our Congress believes in. They want to take away all the regulations and let people just do whatever they want to do. And look at what it's done now to the economy, to the area in Ohio, all these things. People cannot be allowed to be totally without some kind of restraint because they will pursue their own self-interest to the detriment of everybody else. You think the people on that train line are too concerned about the people in Ohio? No. They'll get sued, they'll pay the money, and they'll keep doing what they're doing because they're pursuing their own self-interest. So basically, our form of capitalism kind of lends itself to that, and it's worth thinking about. The challenge that egoism proposes from a moral point of view is that it seems to suggest that individuals should only be concerned with their own well-being without regard for the well-being of others. That is the world that we live in. Everybody's in it for themselves. And the egoists, we have a lot more egoists today than we do altruists, believe me. This conflicts with many of our ethical theories, moral intuitions that emphasize that we have to have empathy and compassion. We have to have concern for other people. They're our brothers. Anybody that's a part of the human race, we should have empathy and compassion on and seek to help them. So as you read this chapter, think about there's some benefits of pursuing one's own self-interest. You do need the safeguards of doing that within the law and being legal and having a moral compass. Don't allow pursuing your own ends to lose the fact that you are a moral person. But it's important to balance that and to recognize with our independence, we also need cooperation and we need mutual support. We support each other. We help each other. It's not just me, my four, and no more. It is working together. And this can help us to create a more just and a more equitable society, to live up to our moral responsibilities as members of a larger community. And I think that's really important, that we realize that we're not alone. No man's an island, that we live as part of a larger community, and that community is extremely necessary if we're to survive as human beings. It will take an ethical approach from from those of us that care to see this world survive. And we see what happens when we don't have an ethical support, when there's a breakdown. And so I hope you'll think about that as you read this chapter. And I do encourage you to read it. I think it's worthwhile. I think it's something that you will find profitable. Okay, thank you. Till next time.